All right, so we're going to review or get started with the number pegs and creating memory objects for numbers. And this starts to be very critical because many cases what we want to do is store information in our memory objects like dates, statistics, I'm just trying to think like if we were doing presidents, we might want to know beginning and end of their terms. If we were going to do states, we might want to know when they became a state, or countries, we might want to know population. So the challenge is that turning numbers, we've created memory objects like Churchill, Church on the Hill, Stalin, bathroom stall. But what we want to do is say, how do we turn numbers, which don't really look like anything, how do we turn those into objects? And so what I'm going to introduce here are several things. One is another technique for ordering memory objects, which is called number pegs. And I use this occasionally, but it's a good one to know. It's a good one to be familiar with, and I think that it's a good bridge in terms of learning how to the different ways that we can turn numbers into memory objects. And then we're going to talk about how do we create our basic number objects, which are the things that you're going to use over and over again, because there are only 10 numbers, right? There's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, and then it's a combination of those things that make every number that we use. And so what we're going to do, as we've talked about, or as you did in your pre-work, is you're going to have a memory object, a basic number object for each of these 110 numbers. And then what's cool about that is that when you have those, then if we want to say that World War II for the United States began in 1941, then we're going to find a way to combine your two basic memory or your two basic number objects into basically a combined memory object that you're going to be able to pack into World War I, or Pearl Harbor in this case. So the first thing I want to do is a quick introduction to memory pegs, okay? Because that's kind of what we have as our lesson. And this is pretty straightforward, so we'll just do this very quickly, and then we'll get into some of these other things. So the first order of business, let's take a step back and talk about memory pegs. And I'm only going to do the memory pegs for these first 10 numbers, 1 through 10, because if you want to remember 10 things, what are your options to remember 10 things? Well, one, you can put it in a mind palace, right, and have 10 locations around your room. And you wanted to remember the first 10 presidents, you put Washington in the first location, and Adams in the second location, and Jefferson in the third location. You do that. That is a very good way to remember things in order. The other thing that you can do is you can do the stories. And I tend to do the stories because I don't have to worry about a location, and I can just create a story and remember. So I did just, and I'm going to do another little video on this. Yesterday, my wife was talking about the Chinese dynasties with our kids, and I just looked online, found the Chinese dynasties, and I made a quick story with the Chinese dynasties to show my wife how I could do it, right? And maybe I'll do a little bonus where you can hear my story. But it's no different than the things that you've already done. It's just a story I created, and if you ask me right now what came after the Chow dynasty or what came before the Han dynasty, I can tell you because I made my little story, right? I decided to remember, and I made it memorable. So a third way to store things in order is something called memory pegs. And basically what we're going to do is we have a memory object for each 1 through 10. And then if we want to remember the first 10 presidents, we associate our first memory object for Washington with our memory peg, which is number 1. And a technique for doing that is a very simple one, which is rhymes. Okay, so is it here? Okay, so a rhyming peg is that for the number 1, we use a word rather that rhymes with 1. So I'm going to give you the ones that I've had. I can't remember if I created these or if somebody gave them to me or not. It's been 20 years. But you can use better or different ones if you want. But for instance, My rhyming peg, for one, is a bun, okay? So think about a hot dog bun or a honey bun. My rhyming peg for two is a shoe. Okay, these are very simple, and the way you remember them is that they rhyme. But eventually, you just need to know that your rhyming peg for three is tree. Your rhyming peg for four is a door. My rhyming peg for number five is a hive, like a beehive. Now remember, why do I choose these? Well, the primary reason I choose them is because they rhyme, right? But the second thing is that these are easy to visualize objects. I can envision a shoe. I can envision a tree. So if I need to say, okay, third president, Jefferson, well, I have my memory object for Jefferson, which could be, depending on how old you are, some people who are older might know George Jefferson from the television show The Jeffersons. If you remember what Jefferson looks like, you could say a picture of Jefferson. You could say a guy named Jeff and his son. You know, this is where you have to come up with something. And the more things you know, the easier it is to come up with memory objects. But then all I do is associate that memory object with a tree. And I know that tree is my memory peg for three. So this is like creating a quickie list. If you want to remember things, you just create that quickie list. So we have door, hive, sticks, heaven. You can use like somebody going into heaven, or a 7-Eleven for 7. 8 could be gate. 9 could be wine, or you could use vine, like a ivy vine. And then 10 could be tent, or I've in the past used hen. This is not something, as I said, I use all that frequently. I tend to use a story because I can create a story very quickly. And then if I need to remember the numbers, then I can go back. But if I'm trying to remember 23 things or 10 things, and I want to know what number it is, then rather than have to go through the story, I can do my pegs, okay? So I want you to practice. I want you to create a 1 through 10 rhyming peg, just so you have it. This is quick and dirty. Bun is 1, 2 is shoe, 3 is tree, 4 is door, 5 is hive, 6 is sticks, 7 is heaven or 7-Eleven, 8 is gate, 9 is wine, 10 is tent. And what I want you to do is practice, right? Take a list of 10 things and create the memory objects for the thing, and then link that memory object to the appropriate rhyming peg. Okay, if you're doing the Bill of Rights, then you're going to write the Second Amendment is the right to bear arms. You associate, either a bare arm being stepped on by a shoe, or a bear who has giant arms running out and grabbing a shoe. We've already done this. You know how to do it. This just gives you another technique for creating a quickie list. All right. So I wanted to introduce that because I think it's a good thing to know. I think having those rhyming pegs is good. But what we're going to start doing is we're going to start learning how to turn any number that's around into a memory object. And that's where the real power comes in. And that's where we'll start to really experience the power. But I want to give you the rhyming pegs as an introduction. And then in our next lesson, we'll talk about how to, going back to our list here, how to take all of these numbers and create a memory object. Now, just to double check that you've done your homework, you should have gone through these numbers and just identified, do any of these numbers, do you have a number or something associated with it? And remember, we talked about this. So for instance, I said, 58 for me is Jack Lambert. What you really want to do, he's a linebacker for the Pittsburgh Steelers, or was. He's a Hall of Fame linebacker for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So if I ever want to remember the number 58, all I have to do is imagine Jack Lambert in my head, right? And so what I can do is then combine 58 with something else, and we're going to talk about how to get that. But I wanted you to think about these so that you can see that the goal here is to have 110 memory objects that you can very quickly in your head associate with a number, so that when you see a number, you can do that in your head. And when you see that in your head, you quickly associate with a number. So what you should have done is looked at these numbers and just seen if anything came up with that you could do it. I'm going to give you a technique, or I'm sharing with you a technique that is it's a practice memory technique for how you can turn each of these numbers into a memory object and use it. But remember, the goal is to have 110 that you can very quickly and easily use. If for you, rather than using the technique that I share with you for 45, if 45 means something to you, then use that, okay? The key is to have a very clear one memory object that you use for each of these numbers. And we'll learn that tomorrow, okay? So what I want you to do, we're going to actually learn two techniques for how to do this, but I'm going to share with you, I'll share with you those techniques, and then you can decide which one you want to use. And you can move forward with that. All right? So the thing I want you to do today is make sure you've reviewed these numbers and just identified if any, two or three of these just jump at you that you already are starting out of the gate with some basic number objects that you can visualize in your head. And I want you to just practice, take some list, and just do a quick association with your number pegs so that you can just see how that works as well as kind of an appetizer for turning numbers into